And
Right.
so, in my mind, it's a matter of who is going to control it. Is it going to be the Clown, Vatican, London, Vatican triumvirate, or is it
Yes.
going to be China?
No, I think I understand the line of thought there. And the reason I was asking the question of the on the tribal aspect because of how it this draws out, right? The
Right.
timing of things. And certain tribes occupy certain ancestral territories, which then has what's in the ground there, right? That's where I was kind of headed on that. But I agree with you in the aspect that the upper tier of that is the controllers that would be in charge overall, right? Those tribal elders, loosely put, are just going to be the puppets that we have today in Congress,
Just
right?
useful idiots at
Useful
the end.
idiots. And where your question, who's going to be? Personally, I'm thinking from a China or West perspective. I think there's been a pact made. Personally, this is my thinking. If we go back to the concept of the triad, right? The money, the London, just keep
Yeah.
it this way, right? The city state, the three city states, London, DC, and Rome, Vatican in particular. Um, if we now look at the usefulness of the US as the military arm going away, China. China has manpower galore. China China is striving to be the military arm for the UN. What's the UN but a giant puppet, right? So
Yeah.
I see a pact being made there, that they'll all reap the benefits. Who's going to come out on top from the most reaping or raping, pillaging? I think it's not going to matter because the people in China are going to still be down in the downtrodden and the political elite there, just like they are in England, just like they are in the rest of Europe, the EU, are going to remain the same. That's just my line of thinking because I think the U.S. has been um, now with the actions that we're seeing. I think that the military power of the U.S. is going to wane, and therefore the military arm of the triad is going to move.
That's tough to
What does
say, though.
KB think? Let's leave KB who lives there.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's
yeah.
what
Sorry.
does KB think?
I, I'm going to answer in a way that actually speaks to both what TN said and breaking. Um, it's, I think the answer is going to be clear because we've got a fairly good idea who's funding these groups. So the current incumbent is his brother-in-law is one of the biggest um, call it miners and affiliated to most of the banks. And the fact that most of the headquarters of the big miners mostly sit in the UK and to a lesser extent in Switzerland. And we know who's funding that part of it. It's no coincidence that once he came into power, the first trip he made within weeks was to the UK, I suspect to get his marching orders. And it's rumored that the EFF, which is kind of like the noisy part of the ANC, and they do things that at least the ANC can distance themselves from. We know, or suspect rather, that they're getting funding from the UK too. To a lesser extent, Europe. The other side of the coin is that we know the Zulus, which is the previous president who was incarcerated, is actually quite close to the Russians. In fact, he was educated in Russia and spent a lot of time there. And he was really the armed side of the ANC. Now, there's appeared to be a split, and it's no coincidence that the Chinese, in his traditional tribal homeland, being the eastern side of South Africa and the Zulu nation, in what was previously protected wetlands, you're finding massive amounts of rare earth minerals, which the dominant one is iridium. So we know that the Chinese are after that. So perhaps there might be some kind of agreement with the globalists who gets what, but we certainly know the Chinese influence on the agricultural side. It doesn't seem to be that the UK or the British are interested too much in the agriculture, but we know that China is looking to feed 1 billion people, 1 billion plus. So they've been actively pursuing agricultural land in sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, it kind of speaks to both your points, but it's really about who's funding them, and I think who's going to come out on top.
Yeah, and the land acquisition from a Chinese have been after that for quite a while, in Eastern Africa, Central Eastern, from what I'm aware of, let alone here in the U.S. itself too, right? And then you bring in the other globalists that we know, the largest farmland owner in the U.S. Yeah, I would. I mean, it's an aspect of how many years, or not necessarily from a timeline perspective, but the evolution of this is where it's going, and that's why I was seeing the aspects of the Chinese coming in, not necessarily from a weaponry perspective, Spectre, where I was making my comment. It was more or less from the armies themselves, the people that are involved in. Trump did a lot, but look at the stuff that's being done now to undermine all of that, particularly in the military. That's where I was seeing that.
Yeah,
and you've only got to look at England to see exactly what's going. So your Second Amendment and talking about arms and the militias, etc. Your Second Amendment come from England. The first thing they done with England, and it started in 1919 and 1920, was to disarm us. And it's took what, 100 years, and I can't even walk outside of my house with a stick without being arrested for having a weapon. What can I just say, though? The videos I've just watched in South Africa, they seem to have some very the Antifas and the communists and the socialists and whatever you want to describe them as, the Marxists. They seem to have advanced weaponry, and they're getting funding from that from somewhere. That's the bit that's dangerous, and I can see some serious stuff happening in this country.
Well, traditionally, Zuma, the incarcerated ex-president, he was the military wing, if you will, of the ANC. So yeah. Not only have they always had weaponry, but they certainly, you saw from some of those clips that some of it's brand new. So there's been a massive proliferation of arms into South Africa.
Well, just to give you an example of this, Sinn Féin are sworn to socialism. So Sinn Féin, I'm talking about the political element in Ireland, and their military arm is obviously the Irish Republican Army, and they were supplied by weapons by the French, and the SAS and others were new and were watching ships and shipments of arms coming into the IRA from the French on French vessels, and were told to leave them alone. So all I'm saying is, when you look at all these different things and you look at the fact that they are getting their arms in, a lot of people in England have been saying that a certain religion has been filling up its religious education centres with arms, and police don't go in there. They're not allowed to go in there. And I think there's going to be a massive issue in this country soon through all of that. But remember that the IRA was the armed, they called it an army, but it was the armed wing of Sinn Féin. And again, they're sworn to socialism. So you got the same thing in South Africa with the ANC.
Well, just to speak to your point about Ireland, the fact that the arms come from France, which happens to purely by coincidence share the same kind of religious beliefs as what Rome does. I mean, that's been pretty obvious from the outset. The fact is that the other side of the coin has been allowing that to happen. So, you know, they're playing us. That's really what it's about. And much the same as in South Africa, because no one's going to benefit other than the oligarchs and warlords. No one's going to benefit other than them. So I think their funders are well aware of it. And I mentioned previous to that it's kind of like almost a gentleman's agreement, you know. Okay, so maybe the West can take the minerals for now, and the Chinese can take the land. So we know that Soros is very active here. He's got oil interests in South Africa, which we've got massive amount of gas off the eastern coast. So there's an energy play, there's a mineral play, and there's an agricultural stroke land play. And maybe they've come to some kind of arrangement between themselves.
I wonder, were we just given a bit of a signal as to perhaps how a lot of the shipments and that were taking place? Did we potentially see something averted and disrupted by way of the evergreen, ever-given ship finally leaving the Suez here recently?
Yeah, quite possible.
You know, I don't find it to be too much of a coincidence that we saw all the evergreen related stuff take place in a very short amount of time, with a certain boat getting stuck in a canal, and then, you know, just mere days later, you have a truck in China bearing the same container on the back end, cattywampus in some lanes in China.
Yeah.
I mean,
that also did, the blockage of the Suez forced a lot of ships to come around the Horn of Africa, which is South Africa. I mean, traditionally, South Africa was the main route prior to the Suez Canal being opened in the 50s. And it's no coincidence that the Afrikaans-speaking Boer people are descendants of the Dutch. So we all know the Dutch East India Company, and their activities in Asia. So, you know, you've always had kind of a symbiotic relationship between Britain and the Dutch. It's no coincidence that the royal families are, you know, perhaps joined at the hip.
And that, for that matter, now you might as well bring in, you know, the current country of EU, right? I mean, it's pretty much being, you know, run out of Brussels, like if it was, you know, the same concept as states and subservient to a central government. And a lot of that, so to Spector's comment, and it made me think, you know, it can cut both ways. What happened there at the entrance to the infamous canal there, and causing ships to reroute. You know, what's interesting is that, in my mind here, without that, the rerouting would have been obvious, wouldn't it? With that, the rerouting facilitates the nothing to see here concept of having containers hitting South Africa, more so than usual, I mean.
We've long suspected that human trafficking is also part of the play, you know, particularly with the containers, particularly with the amount of ships. Richards Bay is currently held hostage, so I don't know if there's too much activity going on from a shipping perspective. But then again, it's difficult for us to get a lot of information here because we've got a curfew. And it's a hard curfew from 9 p.m. in the evening till 6 a.m. in the morning. So why would you have a curfew?
So how do the videos like what we've seen happen then? I'm not challenging your statement. I'm saying, how does it happen, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to ask the question as saying, well, that can't be true. I was saying, how do they get away with it, right? That's where.
Well, what's happened is the alleged supporters of Zuma are not worried about curfews, and who's going to stop them anyway? You know,
It's kind of like our Antifa here and
Yeah,
wearing
yeah.
masks at gatherings.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
No one's stopping them. And in fact, there was a state of emergency declared in that province today by the government. And they said they're going to send in the Defense Force, which at one point in history, South Africa probably had the strongest Defense Force or army in the whole of Africa. And now it's been depleted. I mean, I don't even know if we've got pilots to fly. Military pilots, that is, probably using mercenaries. But yeah, so the military's been depleted. We know that it's no coincidence that they're trying to do the same to you guys. And exactly what they've done is taken away the fangs even of the British Army. I mean, it's happening globally. It's not a coincidence. You're seeing the same thing being played out in different ways in different parts of the world, but the patterns are really obvious.
Yeah, and I was going to comment too and say that the Silk Road folks listening, if you're unfamiliar with what that is reestablishing, it's a Silk Road of old, but don't think for one second that it's purely for trade purposes and getting products and services from point A to B. No, if you recall from the Silk Road of old, there was a lot of sex trafficking, human trafficking, and things of that nature. And they don't think like we do. They don't trade in US dollars and, various currencies. Humans are the currency of trade, and it is the most lucrative of trades that they use. So it's more or less reestablishing the same as what they had of old.
Just another commodity, right?
Just another useless feeder.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at what has come out of China and organ trafficking and move from flying there, now they'll fly or they'll make available the donor, quote unquote donor, on demand. They no longer fly you there; they'll ship them to you.
Yeah, there's that, but I mean, at the same time, here stateside, we're seeing pockets of states wise up to that and say,
Yes.
yeah, we're not gonna be a party to that. And if we find out that, some of these folks have already made trips over there to pick out their organ of choice, right? Based on the inhumane practices they've gone about doing that, we're not going to allow it.
Right. Right. No, I understand. I'm just saying that that's the pattern change, and I just think that it became more lucrative and less obvious, because when you have people from all over the world, particularly the elite class, flying to specific towns in China and coming back with, gee, I got a new lung, gee, I got a new heart, when it's a 3-year waiting period in the US alone for a heart transplant, you can get it within weeks. Excuse me?
Well, you got 1 billion people over there to choose from.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
At the end of the day, the Chinese got a major, major problem on their hands.
They do have a population cap coming up, right? Yeah, exactly.
They shot themselves in the foot with their one child policy. They've got way more males than females, and what's going to happen if you get a bunch of Chinese incels over there who get a little aggressive and pissed off that they don't have women to have their ways with and reproduce, and pretty soon that billion population is now down to 300 million.
Yeah, but consider this. Remember the Roman legions.
True.
Right? So you in essence, you keep what you get to keep. So if you have it in that respect and you use them as a military, those aggressive males, I mean, they can go many different ways. Obviously, I'm just speculating here.
Yeah.
but it's we've seen it in the past. That's how many times the Roman legionnaires were rewarded, right? Through the spoils, and some of the spoils
Mhm.
was the human trafficking.
Yeah, I mean, it's even in biblical
Yes.
stories where, you know, the tribesnet would go conquer a city and they would kill off all the men, the boys, and the women, and everybody else went with them until God told them, "It says, hey, you freaking idiots. We told you not to mix seed," and then they'd have to go through this deal, as like in the book of Numbers, and finally get those women out of the camp that were unclean and not of
Yep.
their tribes. And then how many times did they go through that cleansing because these stiff-necked idiot folks didn't abide in God's word? Many
Yep.
times.
Many times.
But it
Many
just begs
times.
a question with old Xi Jinping and his quote unquote mandate from heaven. How long is that going to stand up? Because I don't think, one, it's going to last very long if they try. And I think the other thing that people fail to realize is that Christianity largely has been driven underground, but China is the largest growing sect of Christianity worldwide. And I don't think it's something that's going to be contained. And they know
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that actually, while you were talking and prior to you mentioning that, people seem to forget that over the past 100 odd years, there's been in excess of about 140 million Christians killed throughout the world, very quietly under the radar. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, same thing. I mean, that's just part of the leftist Marxist doctrine, you know.
Yeah, it's I mean, it, like you were saying earlier, Spectre, about stepping back to the 40,000 foot level type of thing. It's very interesting how, and also your infamous saying of history rhyming, how
May
we've
not
seen
repeat,
this
but it sure
before.
does rhyme.
Right, exactly. How we've seen this, right? It's been chronicled.
Yes.
It's been chronicled. I mean, and the most popular book in the country, year after year after year, it's been chronicled.
Yep.
But nope, look over here. Live in the moment. How many seconds is that microwave going to run?
Mm.
There's another football match, you know, that's the
Yeah.
modern circus.
Yeah. Hey, give them bread and gladiators and they'll follow you forever.
Bread and circuses.
Exactly.
Nothing
Well,
new under the sun.
no, no. So what do you see happening? I mean, let me ask a more personal question, if I may, KB. How are you faring in all of this?
Well, it's been a little difficult because ordinarily, if I was just minding out for myself, I would have headed for the hills. I think biblically, that's what we've been told to do. But unfortunately, my mom's had a stroke and she's really incapacitated, and that's affected her cognitive abilities too. So I've been nursing her, and I've actually had to settle her back in her home again, and I've got 24-hour care. So she's literally 1.5 kilometers away from me, or a mile. And yeah, that's my responsibility right now. So one of the things I did do was go and buy ammunition today. So, you know.
Is that mile a safe mile to travel so far?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's fine.
good.
Also, I'm lucky enough to, there's the security companies are allowed to be out and about in, I can't say we live in a gated community, but it's something similar. And it just happens that the current president lives probably 800 meters away up the road from me. So that I would say it's a safer neighborhood. But yeah, I've managed to, through my contacts, be able to get one of the heads of the security company to agree to take me, if in case there's a medical emergency, to be able to get to my mom after curfew time. So yeah,
That's
you know,
good. That's
you do
good.
what you can.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to hear that about your mother, because I was fortunate enough to come out of the other end of the tunnel with my wife, not in that same shape, but I can appreciate the scare and the realignment that one has to do.
Yeah. I was actually planning to immigrate, and I was going to go and settle. I'm of Greek descent, and I was going to go and settle my mom back in Cyprus because we've got a lot of family there, and get her surrounded by loved ones.
Right.
And unfortunately, this happened, and she's in no state to travel. So whether we like it or not, we're going to fight the fight here. And it's really, it's quite bleak, because one of the people that I introduced to Laura would have perhaps come on the show with me today, but she had to vamoose out of Cape Town because of what we think's coming, and she also had to take her elderly mom out, and she's traveled 3 hours outside of Cape Town to slightly to the northwest of where we are, to a much safer place. So I would have probably been with her or a whole bunch of other friends, going to try and sit it out in a safer place. But it wasn't to be.
Yeah, well,
Man,
just soon though. We should, well, I messaged her, so hopefully we can get in touch. And you know me, the more South Africans I know, the better. So if you're still referring to the woman you put me in touch with.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, seems great.
Yeah, so but she made it safely. I got a message from her at about 8:30 p.m. and so she's safe and sound with her mom. That's good. She had to travel through an area, a squatter camp, and she was a little concerned, but we made some phone calls to see if it was safe, and she drove through. So that's good. One of the things that's actually helped us in the Western Cape is that we've had foul weather, and we're lucky because there's been massive thunder showers, or not really thunder showers, but massive amounts of rain, and it's pretty cold. So that's probably one of the reasons why we've escaped the mayhem that the rest of the country is going through, and hopefully it'll last, but who knows.
Yeah, it's a good deterrent and cover at the same time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, some of us have no choice, and we've got to sit it out.
Man, I feel for you, KB. I really do. Are you we'll talk offline, because I don't.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
as
can
we're
end
recording that.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
end the broadcast now. It kind of sounds like we've kind of talked out that topic, and I know KB's been on air with us previously.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll just end this. KB will be back with us. Daddy Dragons asked me to have him get in touch with him. We'll see KB more, I'm sure. And so with that, we will talk to him later. Homesteader, you're not going anywhere. You'll stick around to talk to him, I'm sure, but you're always welcome back here. You know that. This is your second home. Hopefully you feel that way. Breaking. We'll be back with him Wednesday. With that, I'm going to shut this down now, and we'll hear from KB again. So thanks everybody for tuning into this one, and I'll upload it as soon as I can.